Hello and welcome. This is Michael Hoyer with the Sound Design Blog, and today we're going to be talking about QLab 3. For this video, we're just going to be doing a quick, simple overview of QLab 3. But first off, let's just start out by talking about what is QLab. Well, QLab is a show control software typically used for sound and lighting. So it's an ability to manipulate cues so that they can be used to your advantage. Essentially, you have QLab on screen. Your computer is then hooked into an interface, such as like a Sapphire Pro 40, and then the interface is then connected to the audio console or mixer, and then from the mixer it goes out to your speakers. Now, with all the correct routing, this allows you independent channels of audio. And what does that mean? Well, it means that you're able to take channels of audio from QLab and mix them out to separate speakers wherever you'd like in the house, as long as everything's been routed correctly on the engineering side. So say you want a car to pull up stage right, and you just want it to come out of the stage right speakers so that the audience goes, "Oh my goodness, there's a car stage right. How'd they do that? Wow." Well, you can tell it just to go through speakers that are in that location. If you wanted thunder to come from your hanging speakers up above and your subs only, you could tell it to do that so that it would be more convincing as an effect. Or if you just want to blast some Flight of the Valkyries through everything, heck, I don't know, you can do that. You could play through all your speakers like a standard stereo playback. But, typically you're not going to do that. So in this overview, I'm just going to kind of familiarize you with the layout of the workspace. And we'll go through the cues a little bit. I'm going to skip over a little bit, just less commonly used cues that even I don't really use. I'm just going to kind of skip over them since this is predominantly for sound people. So just looking at this, it looks a little bit different from QLab 2. QLab 3 has its go button top left, but that also works with a space bar. The go just simply tells whatever cue you've set up in here to essentially go, to fire. So starting off, top left here, we have a group. Now, a group cue allows you to take a series of other cues and hold them within a folder. It's a really great option for containing, like, say, a complex storm or pre-show music or even dense sequences that would otherwise just clutter up your space. Groups have 4 modes, and you can look at those right here. The first mode is start first child and enter into the group. Now, understand, when it says child, it's just referring to the first cue within your group. So this would tell it to fire the first cue within the group and then to enter into the group. So looking at that, these are going to be blank, but you'll get the idea. So we have 2 here. Well, I don't want the microphone cue. To delete that, it's Command Delete. Grabbing another audio cue here. Once it goes into it, it's going to fire the first child and enter into the group. So you notice how it didn't shoot out, it went into the group and then just landed on the last cue. Now, if we go to start first child and go to next cue, and I'll set something up outside of the group. These 2 are within the group. This is outside. So if we fire this, it just fired the first cue and then skipped ahead to get outside of the group. And that can be useful if you're doing that big sequence that's going to be really densely programmed and you just want to fire the group and move on. Now, you can also do start all children simultaneously. Notice how it changed the color there. It's blue without it, green when they're going to fire all together. So you fire that. What happens is it fires these 2 cues that were in it, and then it moved on. You'll see that when you're like layering sound effects a lot. Like if you have a bunch of things that are all going to go at the same time, go ahead and group them. It's going to be a lot simpler, less processing on the computer to set that up instead of a bunch of auto continues, which I'll explain in a little bit. But back to this. The last option is to start a random child and go to the next cue. So essentially you're just going to make chaos in your group. And that would just be fire it and it just picks something in the group and it'll fire that off and then it moves on. I've only seen this used once, or I guess heard it used once. And that was done for a production where they had 4 different characters who did the same voiceovers, but depending on the night, it would just randomly pick somebody else to say the narration, which was kind of cool. It's a fun little effect, but realistically, your audience isn't going to know anything about it. So, you know, it's a little bit like, all right, so why? Anyway, moving on. So you notice I was putting these down here. These are audio cues, and they're just like what they sound like. It's a cue for audio. So looking at it here, you have your basics, and it's looking for a target. Notice that it doesn't have a file. You can go fetch a file directly with this, and this will reveal whatever you had targeted. You can go up here top and then just set it on top of it, and that gives it a target. Notice how it now tells you where that file lives. You can also just grab the file and directly drop it in. It's another method for bringing it in. That's what I typically do. I'm not going to waste time with putting down an audio cue and then going back and laying the track on top of it. Just do it all in one fell swoop. So anyway, looking at this, the number refers to the cue number, and you can set that to 0, or not 0, but delete it, and then nothing's present. You can change it to 1, 1.5, whatever, what have you. If you look here, there's different colors. You can highlight your cue, so it's all one color. I'm not that anal about it. Some folks are. Looking through this a little bit more, you have the continue option, which involves auto continue, auto follow, and we'll go into those in a minute. But for now, let's just keep going. So audio has tabs, and the time and loops tab allows you to look at your audio file in like a waveform sense. So what's great about this is that you can select parts of your music just by sliding, highlighting, and then you can actually do what's called a slice in QLab 3. This is new to QLab 3. And you can set it to tell how much you want this to loop right here. So like if I play the cue, it'll play, and that's going to loop back, play it again for the second swipe, and then it'll continue on. And that's pretty sweet. To escape this, I just hit escape, and that'll fade it out, by the way. But if you want to get rid of it, just hit delete all. It's gone. You can also set up a loop. So right now it's doing an infinite loop. And notice I just went to the edge there, grabbed it, brought it over. Fantastic. You can manipulate that. So those are the sorts of things. There's pitch shift, rate, volume automation, and we'll go into this a little bit more in a later episode. But moving on to the next tab, we have the device and levels tab. Here you can choose where your audio output is going to go. Is it going to go to the built-in? Is it going to go to the Scarlett? Whatever. But it's going to default to number 1. And you simply have to manipulate these faders, and that lets you set your volume, which is just delightful. Cross points refer to the inputs. So if it's a stereo file, it's going to have 2 inputs. One is the left, 2 is the right. That's why it's split to the left channel is only going to 1 right now, and the right channel is only going over here to 2. Yeah, so you have a left and a right. It's stereo. Woohoo! From there, we can go ahead and look at the trim. Trim provides, as it's telling you over here, a master adjustment for the overall volume of the cue. These volumes cannot be changed by fade cues. So in general, once you set it, it's going to lock it in on the effect. And I actually don't use trim much. I just do it directly in my device and levels. Now, cool little thing with QLab 3, total game changer, is that it has audio effects, which are great. And if you have like waves packages or other effects packages, you can actually use them, but it'll come standard with the Apple package just because they're already on your computer. But they're pretty fantastic, actually. And there's EQ, there's low passes, those sorts of things, a delay, that's fun, pitch, reverb. Reverb is the best, like, ever. There's some presets on it, too, so that's pretty sweet. But anyway, yeah, you can pick out a reverb. And being able to do this in the space is such a big change. I mean, I can't tell you how frustrating it was to always have to have your reverb set before getting into the space or have a separate reverb file. It was a real pain in the butt, but no longer. Moving on, we have the mic cue. And the microphone cue allows you to take a microphone feed from your audio interface, process it in QLab, and then route it as you'd like. And you can mute microphones, add effects, route them wherever you want them to go. And that's fantastic. But on release, when QLab 3 first came out, this was actually pretty buggy. And it had some really bad delay issues, which was a total bummer when I first bought mine. But anyway, QLab's been hard at work resolving it. It's so much better now. But yeah, so it basically takes the place of MIDI control to a soundboard if you opt for it. It lets you mute, reroute, set effects, fade, whatever. It just lets you manipulate a microphone feed. So that's pretty sweet. Has normal basic stuff here. You go in, choose where you're going to take the feed from, set volume, and effects. Pretty straightforward. Moving on, we have the video cue. Now, a video cue, you're going to use that if you are doing projections, typically. And it's primarily for displaying images or playing videos. Has a lot of the same flexibilities as the audio cue. But the major differences include being able to alter the scale, opacity, and position. Just like you would route audio, you can also route video to different interfaces. So that's great. You can go to multiple projectors, or you can take two images and combine it and work with it. But looking at it, I only have a professional audio license, so you won't really be able to do everything. Custom geometry, for instance, I don't believe I can do that. Maybe I can. It's hard for me to say, because... yeah, okay, I guess you can. I have, like I mentioned, the Pro Audio, but I guess that bumps this up a little bit. In a standard free version of QLab, you can't do any custom geometry, and that's a bummer. But full screen's just going to put whatever you have for your image here into a full display. Just, you can't really alter it. You can mess with the opacity, which I'm manipulating just by pulling up and down here, which can make it more see-through. That's great. Layer, you can choose what layer you want it on so that things can be stacked. But without custom geometry, it's a real bugger. But you can still get creative and come up with things on it. Again, you can set up loops just like you would the audio. Those are all the same. You're doing audio stuff here, effects for the audio, but there's also video effects. So that's pretty neat. And I believe they're just the standard ones that come on the Mac that you're able to mess with. But that's pretty much where that goes. So the next cue we're going to talk about here is the cam cue. And it just lets you take a camera that's been interfaced with the computer and you can project it onto any screen or just put it in a monitor, just like you do with a video cue. But the cool part is it's a live feed, and that's pretty neat. You can use the built-in camera on your computer and say you want to project your face like the Wizard of Oz and, I don't know, scare people as they come into your building and say, yes, I'm great and mighty. But, you know, beyond the point. So there's also the title cue, which works just like a projection would, but you're making titles. Oh my gosh, it's so aptly named. I made a title, and it tells you the pixels and everything, and that's dandy. You can do video effects to it. Choose your surface, your geometry, full screen, what have you. As you can see, it's right down there, telling you how big it is. Let's go ahead and up the scale so you can see it a little bit. There, I made a title. It's so much bigger. But yeah, it works, again, very much like a video cue does. So up next, we have the fade cue. And surprisingly, you know, the fade cue is kind of the workhorse of QLab. It does all the things you really, really need to do. But yeah, so it not only allows you to fade audio however you'd like, but it also fades video. And it can be used to automate effects, which is awesome because you used to not be able to do that. So let's take this fade cue and we'll put it back up with this music and we'll link them. Notice to link it, you have to tell the fade cue what it's going to do, like what it's manipulating. So you drag your audio cue to it, and now it knows, oh, I'm fading this audio cue. That's great. And it's got a red X. Red X means it's not going to work. You have to tell it what you want it to do. All I did was click on the master, pull it all the way down to infinite. It's an absolute fade. Stop target when done. It's going to go for 5 seconds in the action field here. That's just telling you how long it is. And yes, should be good to go. So when we fire this cue, we hear the cue, and then we fire our fade, and wow, it fades. So yeah, that's what a fade cue essentially does on the audio. And we'll go into this a little bit more when we come back to that in a later video. Moving on to the next cue, we have an OSC cue. That's Oscar Sandwich Car. The OSC cue starts to get a little bit complicated, honestly. Basically, it can trigger a number of cues a number of ways, whether it be to tell a cue within QLab to fire or ordering a piece of gear to fade. A book could honestly be written covering OSC uses. So we're not really going to worry about going any deeper on it today, but it's essentially a form of show control. Now, here's my favorite for show control. I like MIDI. I'm a MIDI guy. I guess I'm old-fashioned and such. But with the MIDI here, it looks the same in your basics, but you go into settings and you have to decide on things. Now, we don't have a device hooked up, but you can actually route MIDI within the computer to control things like main stage, which is fantastic. You can tell it to go to a new setting in an outboard effect for it. Or you can control soundboards or whatever. But musical MIDI is a MIDI voice message. There's MIDI show control messages, which is MSC, as you can see there. I use that personally to control things like lighting boards or to change a scene in a soundboard. And we'll go into that a bunch on a later video. But there's also the MIDI sysx message. So essentially, you can command things to do other things. I know that's really, really, that told you so much. But you can do note on, note off, program, change, control, all this fun stuff. Same stuff that like a MIDI keyboard would do. Program change you often use to change a scene in like a digital console. You can also do that on a lighting board to go to the next cue or fire a cue within it. Control change, it's for things like fades. But yeah, we'll go into this a ton more when we actually do the MIDI video. So we'll go on to the next bit here. This is a MIDI file cue. And the MIDI file queue is pretty sweet in that you can load a .MIDI file into QLab and tell it to play through an interfaced instrument. I mean, that's not the only thing you can do, but like that's what I would do with it. So if you've ever felt the need, I guess you can. I don't think I'd ever use it personally, but you might want to start a robot band with just robots, and they could do it. So that's great. Up next, you have Timecode. Now, I know some projection guys that get really dense with Timecode, and it can receive that and read it and be programmed to make QLab sync up, essentially, with whatever they programmed into their footage or their equipment so that everything runs at the same time. And that's sweet, and it's very complicated for me. I'm not a Timecode guy. But basically, all the machines connected will work as a unit, triggering cues that have been automated together on a timeline. And that's me really simplifying, but that's essentially what it is. Now, these look pretty familiar, right? It's a play cue. And guess what it does? It plays. So that's great. Notice I just took that, drug it down, linked it up. So when I fire this, it fires Q1. Now notice it's way back there. That's not going to be useful in a situation right here. But say you were doing like pre-show music with it. And we'll set this up right there. And it's right here. Drag that up to the top. And we did auto follows on this all the way through. I'm just clicking on the right there to make that happen. And I'll explain auto follows in a moment. Don't worry. So say our little pre-show thing has been going, it gets to the last cue, that finishes, it fires, the play cue starts it over again. And it's going to fire and it's going to finish. Now, if these were files, it would move on to the next file, but it's not. So it went through the group, started it over again. It creates a loop, and that's pretty fantastic. And you can actually use a fade on a group and fade it out. And so that would end that. But that's just one use. If you get more creative, there's other ways you can use a play cue. Up next here, we got a stop cue, and guess what that does? It stops the cue. I like that they're so straightforward on these. And they're great for like hard cuts. They're limited in what you would use them for, but if you don't want to fade something out and you just want it to stop right away, you can. So like for me personally, I'll usually use a stop cue with an auto continue into a record scratch. So it works like every time. So like music's playing, I have the stop set up, I put an auto continue in, and it goes into the record scratch sound. So it stops the cue, and then it goes whoop, just like a record scratch would, and comic genius ensues. Because I am talking about it, you know what, we might as well cover it. They're really easy to talk about. So on the far right here, this is with no type of continue on it. It's there, and it's down here. So when you put it onto auto continue, and that's just that straight line like that, it's going to fire the next cue that follows right away. If you put it onto an auto follow, it'll fire this cue. When it finishes, it will automatically fire the next cue. And that's where a lot of dense programming comes in. You can do full hour-long sequences where you hit the button once and it does the rest of it for you. And that's really great for certain things, but that would be how you do it. Or if you want to fire multiple cues at the same time, you can set it up that way as well. I still recommend just firing simultaneously through your group, but that's me. Yeah. So continuing, we have a pause, and that simply takes whatever cue it's looking at and pauses it. So we have this. It's playing. I paused it, and you can see it's got a pause right there. You can hit play, do a play cue, and it'll just work, like you'd expect it to. It's going to just play it right where it left off. And that's dandy. That's great. The only time I could really think to do that, honestly, is if somebody was on stage and they had a boombox or something and they paused it on stage and then you needed to play it again. That's really all I can really think to use it for. So let's move on to the next cue. I'm actually going to clear this all out. And to do that, it's just Command Delete. They're gone. But let's go ahead and bring in a load. So this is a load cue. Essentially what it does, whatever it's looking at, it'll set it up and load it. So, sorry, I'm moving the wrong thing. So I want it to load. There. Now this cue is queued up. It's ready to go. The computer's not going to delay when it fires, though if your computer is really solid, it won't delay anyway. But for long sequences, you want that. And you can actually go into preferences and set it up to auto load, and that's what I personally do. So yeah, that's what load does. It's pretty basic. Reset. The reset cue, if you had paused something and you lined it up with a reset cue afterwards, it simply takes the file and puts it to the beginning. Again, decently straightforward. Devamp. The devamp cue is really great if you know what you're doing with it. So like say you have a musical with canned music and you need it to vamp for dialogue. Traditionally, you really can't vamp. You just have to be like, sorry guys, you got to hit it. Well, with QLab, you can. You can let it vamp. You can set up a loop and then you can finish once the actor says the dialogue they need to, and you can devamp it and continue on. So again, you just simply set a loop in the audio cue that will loop infinitely. And then from there, you assign the audio track to a devamp cue. And then you just fire it when you're ready to move on in the song. And you can do this as many times as you'd like in a tune, actually. It's extremely handy for making transition music even, making it time out perfectly every time. So like the lights go dark and they're doing a scene change and you want it to end right as the lights come up. Well, you can devamp your music if you composed it in a way that's going to loop well. You can devamp it and it'll finish with the lights every time, as long as your stage manager is musical enough to call that. So yeah, the GoToCue simply sets it up so that it goes back. Notice I got to this, I hit it, it goes to the top again where I assigned it. I can't say I've ever used it, but I think it'd be pretty great for if you're doing scripting or some programming within QLab that has an if or clause to it, but otherwise, like in a standard situation, I don't use the GoToCue. Target, arm, disarm, I'm not going to worry about going into. Wait, same thing. Honestly, it waits. Which it's kind of silly that they have the wait, just because we have pre-waits and we have post-waits. So it's a little bit redundant. Memo, the memo queue, the old memo queue, allows you to simply leave yourself a message. Yeah, there. Memo queue is great for reminding you to go to the bathroom or whatever. You can tell yourself to get a sandwich or make sure you remember to run backstage and replace a battery or something. I don't use them much, but I know people that actually kind of live by them. Or you can mark where intermission is in your script, so it's really easy to see, and then you throw a highlight on it, and you're like, oh my gosh, okay, cool. We're coming up on intermission. Great. I really need to go to the bathroom. I don't know why I'm so set on the bathroom thing, but yeah, that's what I got on it. The memo queue, ladies and gentlemen. So we're moving on to the last queue, and that's a script. Now, this is where QLab gets awesome and extremely complicated and able to do a lot of amazing things. It's basically the sandbox of QLab. It's a wide open box of possibilities, much like when a web design platform gives you an HTML box so you can do some coding. And if you know code, if you know programming, you can just tear it up with the script box, like positively tearing it up. But for me personally, it's pretty dense, and I haven't felt a need for it. You can program functionalities into QLab, and that's great. Just Google the QLab script wiki, and that'll have a lot of those functions in there. But I just got to kind of caution you that if you don't know what you're doing, you can kind of do a lot of damage in your session. So just be really careful with it. You don't want to, I don't know, make your system crash or have it fall apart and not know what's going on. Just make sure you have lots of backups saved. Yeah. So I'm not trying to scare you away from it, but just try and make sure you know what you're doing. So I already talked a little bit about the internal volume automation, but this is a final kind of thing that really makes QLab 3 really great, but you can do pitch shifting. Now, that's pretty fantastic if you need to speed something up. So right now, that's it. Just normal. Great. I hit escape 2 times to just end it, by the way. But if we take the rate and we double it, we'll just say that's double, it's going to pitch shift it as well. That's kind of fun, right? So you can do that with voice effects, you can do it with sound effects, whatever. You uncheck pitch shift and fire the cue again. Notice it's not pitch shifting it now, it's just making it play faster. That's kind of great because if you have a scene transition that you're just like 2 seconds too fast, you can speed it up a hair. And boom, problem solved. If you want to get really abstract, you just slow it down a ton and you'll get some really interesting stuff. You can pump this through your subs usually and get some cool effects. Oh my gosh, our theater is so abstract and we're doing art. My mind is melting. The internal monologue is intense. The world is falling apart. Yeah, okay, so enough of that. You can do a lot of that cool stuff. Now, if you do pitch shift with it, it's even more intense. I actually don't think you're going to be able to hear this on computer speakers, but hey, hook up a sub and you got it. I've actually used that before with other sound effects like lions and stuff, like pitch shifting it down to get a really creepy, strange sound and then throwing a ton of reverb on it. That's pretty sweet. But yeah, so before we end this video, let's go ahead and just take a look here. This is a pre-wait, this is a post-wait. What that is when you fire, and we're just going to set it to 5 seconds. When you fire the cue, it's got to do the pre-wait first, and then once it finishes, it'll play the cue. In the same way, the post-wait, after the cue plays, will wait 5 seconds as it plays, as soon as you triggered it, to do whatever's going to happen next. So if you have an auto continue, like I do right there, let's see if I can actually find something to do with it. We'll just copy this. So copy, Command-C, Command-V to copy and paste. Just takes the same cue, makes it work. But when we fire this, that starts the post wait. It's going up to this auto continue, and it fired the next cue. Dandy, right? So yeah, you can get really creative with how those work, but it really comes down to your creativity. So let's kind of make the skinny of this. In conclusion, I have to tell you that QLab 3 is a little expensive, and it's going to be a bit rough purchasing it if you're out of school, but there are really great student discounts, so if you're in school, just get it now. It's really as expensive as one of your general studies giant textbooks, so might as well get something cool, right? Otherwise, you can also rent a license for a short period of time at a really fair price. I know student licenses are $1 a day, so that's not bad at all. There's no reason to say we can't afford it in the show's budget, so you can argue that if you want to. Me personally, I have a pro audio license, but I'm a sound guy, so that makes sense. But you can also spread that license once you purchase it to 3 machines. The idea is that you have one at home, like in your studio, whatever, one at work on the theater system, and then you have a backup system in tandem. So if one QLab fails, it'll switch over to the other one on another computer. And that's pretty generous. But if you go ahead and look in the links and stuff, you can look up the pricing and figure it out. But I'm going to end with this. If there's one piece of wisdom I could pass along to you, like sound designers of the world and other designers, it's that you need to learn the ins and outs of QLab well. You need to know your software well. And if you do that, you will become a much better designer in the theater. Nobody wants to wait for you during tech to figure something out. So if you know the software well and you get the key commands down and you work quickly and efficiently, you'll get a lot more work and you'll be able to more successfully pull off your designs. So yeah, thanks again for watching, guys. Tune in next week for our next video. And as always, feel free to like our Facebook page, the Sound Design Blog on Facebook. Look us up. It's pretty cool. Otherwise, too, check us out on our website, the sounddesignblog.com. We have articles up every week and a video of the week as well, along with one free sound cue per week. We have a lot of weekly things, so definitely check them out, and we'll see you next time.